Let's just get your initial reactions, thoughts on this pick for Kevin Warsh to be the next Fed chairman, and what your understanding is on the shape that his policymaking could make if he is confirmed to lead the central bank.
Yeah, Tyler. I mean, we've been waiting for this announcement. And here's the thing. I think many of us in the economics community and around the world are very concerned about this question of Fed independence and, what kind of person President Trump would put into this role, would nominate to be chair, whether or not they would be able to stand up for, doing serious, incredible analysis of what's going on in the economy and making those independent decisions. And I think that, what Kevin Warsh has shown over the past year is that while he has long been a hawk on inflation, during the global financial crisis, when unemployment was 9%, he was out there saying, hey, we need to be really worried about inflation. But now, ever since it seems like he's been trying to get this job, he's done a flip-flop. And he seems to be parroting the president's views that actually, no, rates are too high and we can lower rates and we don't need to worry about inflation. We don't need to worry about the consequences on the economy of many of Trump's policies that might raise prices. And so that worries me because it indicates that he wants this job very badly. That's not a bad thing, of course. It's an important job, and we want whoever takes this job to be successful in this role. But we need to have someone in this role who's willing to follow the data and evidence and to make sound decisions, not just do whatever the president wants.
Interesting, Heather. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on a post we just saw, a statement from Senator Mark Warner, of course, Banking Committee, and he will factor into this confirmation process. He writes, it's difficult to trust that any chair of the Federal Reserve selected by this president will be able to act with the independence required of the position, knowing that the administration will levy charges against any leader who makes interest rate decisions based on facts and the needs of our economy rather than Trump's personal preferences. Do you share that concern that the chairman knows he could be investigated or face charges if he doesn't do what the president wants?
Well, I think that is obviously the concern. We've seen what happened to Lisa Cook. We've seen the charges, the criminal charges against the Fed and Jay Powell right now. This is a serious breach of the independence that the Federal Reserve has long held. And it's important that, this is about interest rates. It's also about all of the other things that the Federal Reserve does. What kind of things does the president, want the Fed to do in terms of banking regulation, or whether or not banks have access to the credit lines that they need? Is the president going to try to use the Federal Reserve to punish people that he doesn't like? We've seen the president be willing to take all parts of government and use them for his own personal retribution schemes. So I think there is a lot of concern. And I think doubling down on that concern, Kevin Warsh has made these speeches and comments over the past year about questioning Federal Reserve independence. There was an article that I was reading before the show that, appeared in Bloomberg last summer, where he was questioning independence of the Federal Reserve. And so what does he mean by that? Why is he saying that now? And, what kind of chair will he be? These are big questions, and these are the questions that senators should be asking as they go through the confirmation process.
Well, Heather, I'm glad that you brought up that the Fed has more than just monetary policy when it comes to what they end up doing, because we have heard from Warsh previously indicate that he's willing to give up some aspects when it comes to bank supervision. I'm wondering if we can tap on your expertise as working under an administration in economic policy. What would this mean for other regulators in Washington?
Well, I think what we need is bank regulation that is sound, that is focusing on making sure that we are protecting the financial system as a whole, not individual banks necessarily, but the whole system, and making sure that the costs of that are not pushed on to families across the country, and that we don't have something like the global financial crisis happen again. That is one of the really important purposes of the Fed and our financial regulatory system overall. And I think there are real concerns. The administration is already taking steps to pare back some of these regulations on banks, and having a Federal Reserve chair that has already said that they're open to that does raise a lot of big questions and concerns. I will say, It's been hard to watch this process because I don't know that any of the options that it seemed like the president was looking at would be folks that would be able to stand up to him. And so I think another deeper question we need to ask ourselves is, would anyone that the president put in place be able to stand up to him, given the kinds of pressure that he has been putting on these independent institutions?
Well, are you hoping, Heather, that Jay Powell hangs around a while? I mean, could be on the board another couple of years if you want it to be.
Well, I'm a fan of Jay Powell, and I think that he would do a lot of good if he stayed on the board. I know that he watches a lot of press around, what's going on, what folks say about him. I think that he would be an asset and could help really ground, what the Fed does in the kind of steady leadership that he has provided over his term as chair.
So you don't think that this changes the longer term calculus? You think that we could be looking at Jay Powell staying on as a governor through 2028?
Well, I don't know what's in his mind, but I think that that certainly wouldn't be a bad idea.
We're spending some time with Heather Boushey as part of our coverage here on the Friday edition of Balance of Power. The confirmation process could be interesting here, Heather, and I'm curious your thoughts on the way this might go. I realize, obviously, you come from the Biden administration, not the Congress. But Tom Tillis has a problem with this. He's put a block on it until the DOJ investigation into Jay Powell is resolved. And some of the changes in his feelings about the Fed that you touched on earlier have been highlighted by some Democrats in the Capitol. Our headline on the terminal refers to a reinvented Warsh. What types of questions would you ask him in confirmation?
Well, I called it a flip-flop in my note this morning. I think that if I were advising one of the senators what to ask, I think to investigate, why has he changed his views, and what does this mean about his thoughts over the long term? How he's thinking about interest rates. Why was he so hawkish before and so dovish now? And what were the empirical facts and data that caused him to change his mind? I'd want to hear more about that and his vision for his leadership in the Fed.
Heather, I think on any other day, we would really be asking you about what has been a flurry of recent tariff threats from President Trump, particularly amid a week where we're talking a lot about dollar weakness. And just last night, we saw President Trump heighten his tariff threats related to two countries, Cuba and also Canada. In Canada in particular, we've seen a lot of ramped up rhetoric against the Prime Minister, Mark Carney. Now this 50% tariff against Canadian-made aircraft. Last week, it was a 100% tariff. What do you view of these threats when it comes to our northern neighbor? Are these credible threats? Are we posturing ahead of USMCA negotiations, or could it be both?
Well, I do not in any way pretend to read President Trump's mind. And what we have seen, since he took office is a very chaotic implementation of economic policy, and in particular tariff policy. It's very capricious. It comes and goes. It depends on his mood and how he feels about different countries. So I think that's thing one. The announcement about the airplanes seemed very challenging because, where are we going to get those planes? These aren't easy to make. How is this going to affect the U.S. economy? Here we are today talking about the Federal Reserve and prices, and I think the question has to be whether or not those tariffs are going to lead to higher prices.